A Werewolf Shifter Romance. Written by Amelia Hart. Chapter 1. Roses and Silence. The scent of death still lingered in Ronan's memories 3 months later. Not the clean death of battle, but the suffocating weight of loss that had settled into his bones the day they buried an empty lie. Rain fell in sheets across the castle courtyard as Alpha King Ronan Stormclaw stood before the marble tomb, a single red rose clutched in his calloused hand. The petals trembled against his palm, fragile and alive in a way that mocked everything he had become. His dark hair, longer now than he ever allowed it to grow, hung wet against his shoulders. The beard he'd cultivated since ascending to Alpha King obscured the sharp lines of his jaw, but nothing could hide the hollowness in his golden eyes. 3 months, he whispered to the stone that bore her name in elegant script. Selene Nightbloom, beloved mate of the Alpha King, taken too soon. The words were a knife twisting in his chest every time he read them. 3 months, and I still cannot accept it. But the mate bond did not lie. Where once there had been warmth, connection, the constant hum of her presence in the back of his mind, now there was only void, absolute crushing silence that confirmed what everyone else already knew. Selena was gone to him, the bond fallen silent, and he was slowly dying with that silence. He placed the rose carefully atop the others from previous visits, their dried petals creating a carpet of crimson and brown against white marble. Some were fresh from yesterday's visit, others weeks old, curling and brittle. He came every week without fail, drawn by grief and guilt in equal measure. Behind him, the massive castle that had been their home loomed against storm-darkened skies. Somewhere within those stone walls, his brother Valdris played the role of concerned beta, managing the kingdom's affairs while Ronan drowned in sorrow. Somewhere, Captain Bryn Ironhide maintained order among the guards with her iron discipline. Somewhere, life continued as though the world hadn't ended. Ronan's wolf stirred beneath his skin, restless and savage. The beast had been growing more feral with each passing day, desperate for the mate it would never hold again. During yesterday's audience with the regional alphas, it had taken every ounce of control not to let the creature surge forward when Alpha Gareth questioned his judgment on border disputes. The wolf wanted blood, wanted violence, wanted anything to fill the emptiness. "You're going to catch fever," standing in the rain. Ronan didn't turn at the sound of Valdris's voice. His younger brother approached with careful steps, his own dark hair plastered to his skull, the thin beard on his jaw making him look gaunt. Where Ronan was built broad and powerful, Valdris had always been leaner, quicker, his amber eyes sharp with intelligence rather than raw dominance. "I don't care," Ronan said flatly. Valdris stopped beside him, studying the tomb with an expression of carefully crafted sympathy. "The council is worried about you. They're saying you're not fit to lead." "Let them say what they wish. Ronan, you nearly shifted during yesterday's meeting. You almost attacked Gareth for suggesting increased patrols. This isn't like you." Finally, Ronan turned to face his brother. Valdris took an involuntary step back at whatever he saw in the Alpha King's eyes. "What do you expect from me, brother? My mate is dead. The bond is silent. My wolf is dying inside me, and you want me to smile and play politics with alphas who circle like vultures waiting for weakness. I want you to survive this," Valdris said quietly. "Selene wouldn't want you to destroy yourself." The sound of her name from someone else's lips was agony. Ronan turned away, fists clenched at his sides. "You know nothing of what she would want." Valdris was silent for a long moment before speaking again. "Will you attend the feast tonight? Lord Theron is expected to arrive. It would be good if you showed him you're still capable of ruling. Lord Theron Nightbloom, Selene's father, the Alpha of the Eastern Territories who had trusted Ronan to protect his only daughter, the man whose eyes now held nothing but accusation and grief whenever they met." "I will be there," Ronan said, though the thought of food turned his stomach. He couldn't remember the last time he'd eaten a full meal. Sleep was equally impossible, his nights haunted by phantom sensations of a bond that no longer existed. Valdris placed a hand briefly on his shoulder, a gesture of brotherly comfort, before departing. Ronan remained at the tomb until the rain finally ceased, leaving him soaked and shivering, but still unable to feel anything beyond the numbing cold of loss. The memory came unbidden, as it always did when he stood here. 9 months ago, at the gathering of regional alphas in the Grand Hall, he had scented her before he'd seen her. Wildflowers and moonlight, sweet and pure in a way that called to every primal instinct he possessed. When their eyes met across the crowded room, the mate bond had snapped into place with such force it nearly drove him to his knees. She had felt it too. He'd watched her emerald eyes widen, her hand flying to her chest as though she could physically grasp the golden thread now connecting them. Red hair cascaded over her shoulders in waves of copper and flame, and her pale skin had flushed with recognition and wonder. Lord Theron had been overjoyed at the match. His daughter, mated to the Alpha King himself, an alliance that would strengthen both their territories, cement political ties, bring prosperity to the eastern lands. They'd celebrated that night with wine and music, and Ronan had been unable to take his eyes off her. "I've heard stories about you," Selene had said when they finally managed a moment alone on the castle balcony. Her voice had been soft but confident, her green eyes studying him with open curiosity. "They say you're the strongest alpha in 5 generations. They exaggerate," he'd replied, though his wolf had preened at the praise from their mate. "And they say you're fair, that you rule with justice rather than fear." She'd stepped closer, and he'd caught the full force of her scent, intoxicating and perfect. "Is that true?" "I try to be the leader my people deserve." She'd smiled then, and it had felt like sunlight breaking through storm clouds. Then perhaps the moon goddess chose well. 3 months after that first meeting, they'd performed the claiming ritual under a full moon. The ceremony had drawn alphas from across the realm, all witnessing as Ronan and Selene exchanged vows and bites, marking each other as mates for life. The bond had solidified that night, going from golden thread to unbreakable chain of love and loyalty. Selene had been everything he'd never known he needed, gentle where he was, fierce, curious where he was certain, her still developing healing powers a perfect complement to his warrior strength. She'd asked endless questions about pack dynamics, about his duties as Alpha King, about the ancient laws that governed their kind. At night, curled against his chest, she'd traced the scar on his face and told him it made him look distinguished rather than frightening. "I want to be worthy of you," she'd whispered one night, her fingers intertwined with his. "I want to be a Queen Luna who makes you proud." "You already are," he'd told her, and meant it with every fiber of his being. 3 months ago, they'd found her body torn apart by rogues near the northern border, or what they claimed was her body. The funeral had been a nightmare of politics and grief, with Lord Theron barely able to stand as they lowered the shrouded remains into consecrated ground. The royal healers had examined the remains through ritual, but some veiling spell, delicate and expertly cast, had muted both scent and aura, leaving even them deceived until the magic faded months later. The moment they'd sealed the tomb, the mate bond had fallen silent, and Ronan had known with absolute certainty that she was gone. What little peace they'd had as mates had lasted 6 full months between their wedding and the day she vanished. 9 months in total from first scent to loss, a cruel symmetry he could not forget. Now he visited every week, leaving roses and apologies to marble and memories. What Ronan didn't know, what he couldn't know, was that hundreds of miles to the north, in a tower abandoned after plague ravaged the territory 20 years ago, his mate still breathed. Selene Nightbloom hung in darkness. Silver chains wrapped around her wrists and ankles, the metal burning against her skin with constant agonizing pressure. The chains didn't just bind her body. They suppressed everything supernatural within her, cutting off her wolf, her healing powers, and most cruelly, the mate bond that might have let Ronan know she still lived. She had no idea how long she'd been here. Time had become meaningless in the dark. Days blurred into nights, marked only by the occasional visit from her captor, who brought water and stale bread but never answers. She was weak, confused, her mind struggling to understand how she'd ended up in this nightmare. The last clear memory she had was walking in the castle gardens, enjoying the afternoon sun. Then nothing but darkness and pain, and the horrifying realization that she was utterly, completely alone. Footsteps echoed on stone stairs, and Seleni's heart raced with fear and desperate hope. The door creaked open, and a figure entered carrying a torch. The sudden light hurt her eyes after so long in darkness. "Awake, I see," the figure said, and Seleni's blood turned to ice. She knew that voice, knew it so well that recognition was a physical blow. "Why?" she managed to croak through a throat raw from screaming. "Why are you doing this?" Her captor smiled, stepping closer, amber eyes gleaming in the torchlight. "Because some things are worth more than loyalty, my lady. Some things are worth everything." Valdris Stormclaw set down the torch and approached with the bread and water that would keep her alive for another few days. Just alive enough to serve whatever twisted purpose he had in mind. Just alive enough to suffer, while her mate mourned a death that hadn't happened. While hundreds of miles south, Ronan placed roses on an empty tomb and slowly went feral with grief. Chapter 2. Whispers in Darkness. The nightmare always began the same way. Corridors stretching too long, torches throwing treacherous shadows, her voice threading the dark. "Ronan, please." He ran and never reached her. Then he would wake, gasping, reaching for the bond and finding only the familiar void of its silence. Tonight marked the 4th time this week he'd woken this way. Dawn light crept through his windows, painting everything in shades of gray that matched the emptiness inside him. He pressed the heels of his palms against his eyes, trying to force away the lingering sensation of her voice. "You're losing your mind," he muttered to the empty chamber, but the dreams felt so real. More real than anything else in his waking life these days. Sometimes he could have sworn he actually heard her calling to him, felt her fear and confusion bleeding through some connection that shouldn't exist. His wolf stirred restlessly beneath his skin, growing more savage with each passing day. Yesterday, during the council meeting with the regional alphas, he'd nearly lost control completely. Alpha Gareth had questioned his judgment regarding border patrols, his tone carefully neutral, but his eyes sharp with calculation. Perhaps the Alpha King is too consumed with personal matters to see threats clearly. The words had been measured, diplomatic even. But Ronan's wolf had taken them as challenge. His vision had gone gold at the edges. Canines elongating, every instinct screaming to establish dominance through violence. Only Valdris's hand on his shoulder in quiet warning had prevented him from launching across the table. The other alphas had exchanged meaningful glances. They were beginning to question whether he remained fit to rule. A feral Alpha King was dangerous to everyone, including his own pack. A sharp knock interrupted his dark thoughts. "Enter." Captain Bryn Ironhide stepped inside, her military bearing perfect as always. But her gray eyes carried something that made his wolf go still and alert. "My king, I've completed the preliminary investigation you authorized. 3 days ago, Bryn had approached him with concerns about Celine's death. He'd initially dismissed them, but something in her certainty had compelled him to grant permission for quiet inquiry. What did you find?" Bryn pulled a rolled parchment from her belt, spreading it across his desk. "Inconsistencies, my king. Significant ones. The official report states Lady Selene was attacked by rogues near the northern border while taking an evening walk." Ronan studied the map she'd drawn, marking the location where the body had been discovered. And Lady Selene never took evening walks alone. She always brought guards when leaving castle grounds. You know this to be true. He did. Selene had been cautious, always aware of her importance as his mate and future Queen Luna. Second, the attack site showed no evidence of struggle beyond the immediate area. No scent trails leading to or from the location. No tracks from rogues approaching or fleeing. Bryn's voice remained carefully neutral. "It's as though the body simply appeared there. Rogues could have covered their tracks," Ronan said. But doubt crept into his voice. "They could have," Bryn agreed. "But rogues are typically desperate, chaotic. This was precise. Clean." She paused. "There's more. The guards who found her were new transfers, assigned to that patrol route only 2 days before the incident. The transfer orders were signed by Prince Valdris." Ice flooded Ronan's veins. "What are you suggesting, Captain?" Bryn held his gaze. "I'm presenting facts. Perhaps there are explanations I haven't considered." Ronan's wolf surged beneath his skin, rage flashing hot and fast. Only centuries of drilled discipline kept him from tearing through the corridors to confront his brother that instant. She met his eyes steadily. But the mate bond is absolute. If she truly died, you would have felt it sever. Instead, you feel nothing? Nothing, Ronan confirmed, though the word tasted wrong somehow. The bond is silent, dead, or suppressed, Bryn spoke quietly. Ancient stories tell of bonds being blocked by powerful magic. Rare materials like pure silver can sever supernatural connections temporarily. If someone wanted you to believe she was dead while keeping her alive, the thought was too monstrous to fully contemplate. Yet it aligned with the dreams, with the persistent feeling that something about this entire situation felt wrong. 3 more days, Ronan said. Investigate further. If there's truth to be found, I want it. Yes, my king. Bryn bowed and departed, leaving him with thoughts that threatened to tear him apart. That afternoon, Lord Theron Nightbloom arrived with warriors from the Eastern Territories. The older Alpha looked haggard, grief having carved deep lines into his face. When they met in the Great Hall, tension crackled between them. Lord Theron, Ronan greeted formally, you honor us with your presence. Honor. Theron's voice was sharp as broken glass. 3 months, and still no rogues caught. No justice served. My daughter is dead, and you do nothing but leave flowers on her tomb. The accusation cut deep, because it held truth. Ronan had been paralyzed by grief, leaving investigation to others. The rogues will be found, Ronan said, his alpha presence rising to meet Theron's challenge. I swear it on my blood. Your blood failed to protect her in the first place. Theron stepped closer, his own alpha dominance pressing against Ronan's. What good are your oaths when you couldn't keep my only child safe within your own territory? The Great Hall fell silent. Such open disrespect would normally demand response, but these were not normal circumstances. Theron was a grieving father, and Ronan understood that rage intimately. I failed her, Ronan admitted quietly, the words costing him everything. Every day I live with that knowledge. But I promise you, Lord Theron, justice will be found, no matter who stands in my way. Something in his tone must have conveyed deeper meaning, because Theron's expression shifted from rage to sharp attention. You've learned something. Perhaps. Or perhaps I'm chasing phantoms born of grief. Ronan glanced at the assembled court, at nobles and alphas watching with varying degrees of sympathy. But I will know the truth. As Theron was escorted to guest quarters, Valdris appeared at Ronan's side. His younger brother's amber eyes carried concern and sympathy. That was diplomatic, brother. Accepting blame when clearly the fault lies with rogues. Ronan studied Valdris carefully, really looked at him for the first time in months. His brother met his gaze steadily, nothing but brotherly concern visible. The guard transfers, Ronan said casually. The ones you approved before Celine's death. Standard rotation. Valdris replied smoothly. We'd received reports of increased rogue activity. I wanted fresh eyes on those routes. It sounded reasonable, logical. Yet something about it sat wrong. Far to the north, in her prison of stone and silver, Celine was finally achieving fragile clarity. The confusion that had consumed her first weeks of captivity was giving way to desperate awareness. She needed to understand where she was, why she was here, how to escape. The healing powers she'd been developing before her capture stirred weakly within her, trying to manifest despite the silver chains binding them. Small injuries she inflicted on herself would heal slowly, her abilities fighting the suppression. When the door opened and torchlight flooded the chamber, she was ready with awareness instead of terror. Valdris entered carrying bread and water. He studied her with those amber eyes that reminded her painfully of Ronan, yet held something fundamentally different. Awake and aware, I see, he said softly. That's progress. Where am I? Celine asked, her voice hoarse but steady. Somewhere safe. Somewhere no one will find you. Ronan will find me. The mate bond. The mate bond is silent, isn't it? Valdris crouched beside her, his expression unreadable. You've tried reaching for it. You feel nothing but emptiness where warmth should be. Celine's heart raced. It was true. The bond that should connect her to Ronan was gone, severed somehow. What did you do to me? I'm protecting you. Valdris said, his voice carrying strange sincerity. From truths too painful to face in daylight. From realities that would destroy you. What truths? What are you talking about? He set down the bread and water, standing. There was a funeral, Lady Selene. The entire kingdom mourned. Even now, my brother visits your tomb every week. Leaving roses for a mate he believes is lost forever. You're lying. But fear crept into her voice. The emptiness of the bond, the silver chains, the isolation. What if he was telling some twisted version of truth? Am I? Valdris moved toward the door, taking the torch. Rest, my lady. Gather your strength. You're going to need it for what comes next. He left her in darkness, his words echoing like poison. Selene curled against the cold stone, reaching desperately for the mate bond and finding only void. But she refused to believe his enigmatic claims. Ronan would never abandon her, would never stop searching. She had to believe that. Had to hold on to hope, even in this lightless prison where truth and lies twisted together until she could no longer tell them apart. Chapter 3. Secrets Unburied. Bryn returned 3 nights later with evidence that changed everything. Ronan stood in his private study as she spread documents across his desk, her expression grave in the candlelight. Outside, a storm was gathering, wind howling through the castle's ancient stones. We exhumed the tomb tonight, Bryn said without preamble. Under cover of darkness, with only my most trusted warriors present, Ronan's heart hammered against his ribs. And the body has no scent mark, my king. Every mate carries their partner's scent permanently, even in death. It's impossible to falsify. This corpse, she paused, choosing words carefully. It was created, not born. Magic was used to craft something that resembled Lady Selene, but it's not her. The room seemed to tilt beneath Ronan's feet. Hope, terrifying and painful, surged through him. You're certain? Absolutely. I brought our eldest healer to verify. She confirmed the body was constructed using shadow magic, an extremely rare ability. Bryn pulled out a smaller parchment. In the entire kingdom, only 3 individuals possess this power. 2 are elderly hermits living in the eastern mountains, far from court politics. The third, Valdris. Ronan finished, his voice hollow. Yes, my king. There is one more detail, Bryn added. The false body had been wrapped in a subtle cloak of shadow magic at the time of the funeral, enough to mute both scent and aura. Only once that veil decayed did our healers recognize the construct for what it was. Ronan turned away, staring out the window at gathering storm clouds. His brother, his trusted beta, the man who had stood beside him at the funeral, who had consoled him through the darkest days, who had managed the kingdom while grief consumed him. Perhaps there's an explanation, Bryn offered quietly. Perhaps someone else. No. Ronan's hands clenched into fists. The guard transfers he authorized. The convenient timing. His proximity to every decision made regarding her death. He turned back to face his captain. How long have you suspected him? Since the beginning, my king. But suspicion without evidence is merely paranoia. Now we have proof of deception, though not yet proof of who orchestrated it. What else have you learned? Bryn's expression darkened further. I found one of the mercenaries who participated in the false attack. He's being held in the lower dungeons. Under questioning, he revealed they were hired by someone wearing a royal seal. He never saw the face, but the voice was young, male, educated. Bring him to me. My king, if you use Alpha Command on him, Valdris will know we're investigating. I don't care. Ronan's voice carried the full weight of his authority. If my mate is alive somewhere, being held against her will, then every moment we waste is another moment she suffers. Bring the mercenary. Now. Bryn bowed and departed swiftly. Alone, Ronan pressed his palms against the stone windowsill, his mind racing. The mate bond was still silent, still empty. But if Selene lived, if she was being held somewhere with silver chains suppressing their connection, then that silence meant nothing. The dreams came back to him with new clarity, her voice calling his name, begging for help. What if they weren't nightmares at all? What if some deep part of him, some instinct that transcended even the mate bond, knew she still lived? The interrogation of the mercenary was brutal and efficient. The man, hardened by years of violence, broke within minutes under Ronan's alpha command. The supernatural compulsion stripped away lies and evasion, leaving only raw truth. "I was hired to stage an attack," the mercenary gasped, sweat pouring down his face as he fought against the command-forcing honesty. "Create a scene that looked like rogues killed the Queen Luna. We were given a body, told to damage it beyond recognition, leave it where the patrol would find it." "Who hired you?" Ronan demanded, his voice layered with power that made the dungeon walls shudder. Never saw his face. He wore a hooded cloak, but his voice, educated, noble, young. He had the royal seal, proved he was authorized. The mercenary's resistance crumbled completely. He paid half in advance, promised the rest after the job was done. Said the Alpha King had enemies who wanted his mate dead, that we were preventing a worse fate for her. "Where did you meet him?" "The old mill, 2 miles north of the castle. 3 nights before we staged the attack." Ronan released the command, and the mercenary collapsed, gasping. "Captain Bryn, have this man held in isolation, no contact with anyone. If he speaks of this interrogation, his death will not be quick." "Yes, my king." As they climbed back toward the main castle levels, Ronan's mind worked through the implications. The evidence pointed unmistakably toward Valdris, yet confronting him directly could be disastrous. If his brother had hidden Celine somewhere, a premature accusation might cause him to panic, to do something desperate. "We need to find where he's keeping her," Ronan said. "If she's alive, she's being held somewhere isolated. Somewhere Valdris can visit regularly without drawing attention." "The Northern Territories," Bryn suggested. "They've been largely abandoned since the plague 20 years ago. Few patrols, fewer witnesses. Have scouts search every structure in that region, discreetly. If Valdris suspects we're investigating, he might—" Ronan couldn't finish the sentence. The possibilities were too horrible to voice. The next day brought fresh complications. 2 minor regional alphas, Gareth and Edmund, formally requested an extraordinary council meeting. The message was diplomatically worded, but the underlying meaning was clear. They questioned whether Ronan remained fit to rule. "They sense weakness," Valdris said when he delivered the message to Ronan's chambers. "Your grief has made you vulnerable in their eyes. They see an opportunity to challenge your authority." Ronan studied his brother carefully, searching for any sign of guilt or deception in those amber eyes. Valdris met his gaze steadily, concern etched across his features. If he was the architect of this nightmare, he was a masterful actor. "Let them come," Ronan said. "I'll remind them why I am Alpha King." "Brother, you nearly shifted during the last council meeting. Your control is slipping. Perhaps you should postpone." "I said let them come." The alpha command in his voice made Valdris take an involuntary step backward. For just a moment, something flickered across his brother's face. Resentment? Fear? But it vanished too quickly to identify. Far to the north, Celine had been marking time by Valdris's visits. She'd counted 12 since achieving clarity, which suggested roughly 2 weeks had passed. The chains still bound her, the silver still suppressed her powers, but she was learning to work within those limitations. When the door opened this time, she was ready with a performance. She'd discovered that Valdris responded better when she appeared broken rather than defiant. "Please," she said softly as he entered with food and water. "Please tell me what's happening. Why am I here?" He studied her for a long moment before setting down his burden. "You really don't remember the courts, do you? 2 years ago at the regional gathering. Your father brought you to discuss trade agreements." Celine searched her memory. She'd been 22, barely interested in politics, more concerned with her healing studies. I attended many gatherings. You wore green silk that day. Your hair was bound in braids. You laughed at something your father said, and the sound—" Valdris's voice took on a distant quality. "It was the most beautiful thing I'd ever heard." Horror crept up her spine. "You've been watching me for 2 years? Watching. Waiting. Hoping." He moved closer, not quite touching her. "Then Ronan met you at that cursed feast, and the mate bond snapped into place. Just like that, you belonged to him. You looked at him the way I dreamed you'd look at me. The mate bond isn't a choice," Celine said carefully. The moon goddess decides. The moon goddess is cruel, Valdris interrupted, bitterness sharp in his tone. She gives everything to my brother. The throne, the power, the respect. And you. Especially you. His hand reached out, stopping just short of her face. Do you know what it's like to want something so desperately that it consumes you? To watch it be given to someone else who doesn't appreciate how precious it is? Celine's mind raced. This was more than obsession. This was years of resentment, of jealousy festering into something dark and twisted. She needed to use it, to gain information she could use for escape. Where am I? She asked softly, making her voice vulnerable. Please, I need to understand. The Northern Territories. Old quarantine lands from the plague years. No one comes here anymore. It's perfect isolation. He seemed pleased by his own cleverness. I hired mercenaries to create the attack scene. Used shadow magic to craft a body that would pass initial inspection. Everyone believes you're dead, Celine. Even Ronan. He thinks I'm dead? The words were barely a whisper. Despite everything, hearing it confirmed was devastating. He mourns you beautifully, Valdris said, almost tenderly. Visits your tomb every week with red roses. He's slowly going feral without his mate. It's quite poetic, really. The cruelty beneath the words made Celine's stomach turn, but she forced herself to maintain composure. You're his brother? How can you bear to hurt him this way? Because he's had everything, Valdris said simply. For once, just once, I wanted to take something from him, to make him feel the loss I've lived with my entire life. He stood abruptly, as though realizing he'd revealed too much. Rest, my lady. You'll need your strength. After he left, Celine allowed herself a moment of trembling rage before focusing on what she'd learned. Northern Territories, plague quarantine lands, abandoned structures. And most importantly, Valdris was mentally unstable, his obsession with her twisted up with resentment toward Ronan. She had information now, a location, a motive, a clear picture of her captor's fractured psyche. If she could find a way to send a signal, to strengthen her healing powers enough to push past the Silver's suppression, perhaps she could reach Ronan. The mate bond might be silent, but love, she told herself fiercely, was stronger than any chain. She just had to find a way to make him hear her. Chapter 4. The Flickering Thread. Ronan had tracked wolves for 2 decades. He knew how to move unseen, how to observe without being observed. Now he used those skills on his own brother. The decision to place trackers on Valdris had been Bryn's suggestion, executed with surgical precision. Tiny enchanted stones, no larger than grains of sand, attached to his brother's cloak during a casual embrace. They would report Valdris's movements for the next fortnight. What they revealed was damning. He travels north every 3 days, Bryn reported, spreading a map across Ronan's desk. Her finger traced a route that led deep into abandoned territories. Always alone, always to the same region. The old plague lands. Shadow veils masked his scent and blurred his trail. Enchantments subtle enough to evade routine patrol magic. Ronan studied the marked locations, his jaw tight. How long has this pattern existed? I cross-referenced with guard logs. Since 2 weeks before Lady Celine's supposed death. My king, he's been visiting that area for nearly 4 months. 4 months. Long enough to prepare a prison. Long enough to orchestrate a false death. Long enough to hide his mate somewhere no one would think to look. We ride tonight, Ronan said. You, myself, and 2 warriors you trust absolutely. No one else can know. My king, if Valdris discovers we're investigating, then we move quickly. Ronan's golden eyes held lethal promise. If she's alive, if she's being held in those ruins, every moment we delay is another moment she suffers. They departed under cover of darkness. 4 riders moving swiftly through forest paths that would leave no obvious trail. Ronan had chosen warriors who had served since before Valdris became Beta. Men whose loyalty was to the crown rather than individual princes. The journey north took 2 days of hard riding. They followed the tracker's signals, watching as Valdris's pattern became clear. He traveled to a specific tower, an old quarantine structure from the plague years, abandoned and forgotten by most of the kingdom. That's where she is. Ronan said with absolute certainty as they observed the tower from a concealed position in the forest. I can feel it. Bryn gave him a sharp look. The mate bond? No, not yet. Just instinct. But it was more than instinct. Something deep in his chest pulled toward that tower with magnetic insistence. They settled in to watch and wait, needing to understand the structure's defenses before attempting entry. It was during the 3rd hour of observation that everything changed. Inside the tower, Selene had been counting heartbeats, measuring time by the rhythm of her own pulse. She'd discovered that her healing powers, though suppressed by silver, hadn't disappeared entirely. They gathered slowly, like water filling a cup drop by drop. When Valdris arrived this time, his agitation was immediately apparent. His movements were jerky, uncertain, his amber eyes darting around the chamber as though expecting to find someone else there. What's wrong? Selene asked, keeping her voice carefully neutral. Nothing. Everything. He set down food and water with less care than usual. Your mate is asking questions. Captain Bryn has been investigating. They're getting too close. Fear and hope warred in Selene's chest. Ronan was searching. He hadn't given up. Perhaps you should let me go, she suggested softly, before this becomes worse for everyone. Let you go? Valdris laughed, but there was no humor in it. You're the only thing I have that's truly mine, the only thing my brother can't take back. He moved closer, studying her face. Do you know what it's like to always be second? To watch someone else receive everything you've ever wanted? I know what it's like to be trapped, Selene said. To have no choice in your own fate. Something in her words seemed to reach him. His expression softened marginally. You need to trust me, Selene. I'm protecting you from truths that would break you. What truths? Instead of answering, Valdris knelt beside her. I'm going to loosen the chains for a while. You've been cooperative, and I want you to see that I'm not the monster you think I am. Selene's heart raced as he reached for the silver chains binding her wrists. This was the opportunity she'd been waiting for, the chance she needed. The moment the silver separated from her skin, power flooded through her system with overwhelming force. The healing abilities she'd been developing before her capture, suppressed for 3 months, exploded outward in response to sudden freedom. Golden light emanated from her hands, warm and brilliant in the darkness. Selene gasped as the energy coursed through her body, instinctively directing it toward the damages accumulated during captivity. Bruises faded, cuts sealed, the constant ache in her limbs dissolved. But more than physical healing occurred. The power sought out other injuries, other suppressions. It pushed against the invisible barriers that had been keeping her isolated, and for the first time in 3 months, Selene felt it. A pulse. Distant. Faint. Barely more than a whisper against her consciousness, but undeniably there. The mate bond, so long silenced, flickered weakly back to life. The sensation was so unexpected, so overwhelming that she cried out. The sound was part joy, part desperation, a call she couldn't control even if she wanted to. What's happening? Valdris demanded, reaching to replace the chains. But Selene barely heard him. She focused everything she had on that fragile connection, pouring her consciousness toward it, willing it to grow stronger. Miles away, in the forest surrounding the tower, Ronan went absolutely still, every muscle in his body locked as something impossible happened. Where there had been only void for 3 months, where the mate bond had been silent as death itself, suddenly there was something. A pulse. Faint as a candle flame in a storm, barely perceptible, but real. His wolf surged forward with recognition and triumph. The beast knew, even if his human mind struggled to accept it, that was Selene. Alive. Close. My king! Bryn's voice seemed to come from very far away. Ronan pressed his hand against his chest, feeling for that impossible sensation. It was so weak he could almost believe he'd imagined it. But his wolf wouldn't be fooled. The creature inside him, feral and desperate for months, suddenly focused with predatory clarity. She's in there, he breathed. She's alive, and she's in that tower. Are you certain? As certain as I am of my own heartbeat. The pulse came again, slightly stronger, carrying an emotion he recognized intimately. Fear, yes, but also fierce determination. His Celine, fighting even in captivity. The connection faded as quickly as it had appeared, leaving him gasping with loss. But it had been enough. Enough to know with absolute certainty that she lived. Enough to confirm that every suspicion, every investigation, every moment of doubt had been justified. We go in tonight, Ronan said, his voice carrying the full weight of alpha command. Prepare for assault. Whatever guards or defenses that tower holds, we breach them. I'm not leaving without my mate. Bryn nodded sharply, moving to brief the warriors. Ronan remained frozen, his hand still pressed against his chest, trying desperately to feel that connection again. But it was gone. Suppressed once more by whatever silver bound her. Inside the tower, Valdris had replaced the chains, the silver once again cutting off Celine's abilities. She slumped against the stone wall, exhausted, but triumphant. What was that? Valdris demanded. His earlier agitation transformed into open fear. What did you do? Nothing. Selena lied, but she couldn't keep the small smile from her lips. Just healing. As you said, I needed to restore my strength, but she had done so much more. For just a moment she had broken through the suppression. For just a moment she had touched the mate bond and felt Ronan on the other end of it. He knew. She was certain of it. Somehow, impossibly, he had felt that pulse just as she had. And if she knew her mate at all, she knew he was already coming for her. Valdris stared at her for a long moment, suspicion and confusion warring in his expression. Finally, he stood. I need to check the perimeter. Don't try anything foolish, Celine. You're in the middle of nowhere. Even if you escaped this room, you'd never survive the wilderness. After he left, Selene closed her eyes and focused on the memory of that connection. It had been real. Brief, fragile, but real. The mate bond still existed, buried under silver and magic but not destroyed. And now, Ronan knew she was alive. Now the hunt would truly begin. Outside, hidden in the forest, an Alpha King prepared for war. Not against armies or rival packs, but against his own blood, against the brother who had stolen everything. The storm was finally coming. Chapter 5. Blood and Fury. The storm broke as Ronan approached the tower, rain lashing against stone walls that had stood empty for 2 decades. Lightning illuminated the structure in stark flashes, revealing crumbling battlements and windows dark as empty eye sockets. But inside one of those windows, Ronan knew, his mate waited. The mate bond pulsed stronger now, regular as a heartbeat, calling to him with desperate urgency. Each pulse carried emotion he recognized intimately. Fear, determination, and beneath it all, hope that he would come. 6 mercenaries patrolling the perimeter, Bryn reported, rain streaming down her face. 2 at the entrance, 4 circling, all armed with silver weapons. They know we're coming, one of the warriors muttered. Good, Ronan said, his voice carrying the edge of his wolf. Let them be afraid. Inside the tower, Valdris had returned to find Celine different somehow. More alert, more focused, her green eyes tracking his movements with calculation rather than fear. It set his nerves on edge. Something's changed, he said, pacing the chamber. You did something when I loosened the chains. I healed myself, Selena replied calmly, as you suggested I should. No, it was more than that. He moved closer, studying her face. You reached for the bond, didn't you? You tried to contact him. Celine said nothing, but her expression must have confirmed his suspicions, because Valdris's face contorted with rage. Foolish woman. Do you think he'll forgive you for making him believe you were dead? Do you think he'll want you back after months of suffering? His voice took on a cruel edge. I've watched him deteriorate. Watched his wolf go feral. He's not the man you remember anymore. You're wrong, Celine said quietly. The mate bond doesn't lie. I felt him when our connection sparked. He's still there, still fighting, still mine. Mine! Valdris roared, and suddenly the careful mask he'd maintained for weeks shattered completely. You were supposed to be mine. I saw you first, loved you first, wanted you with every fiber of my being. But the moon goddess gave you to him instead. To Ronan, who already had everything. The bond chose. I don't care what the bond chose. Valdris's hands trembled with barely controlled violence. Do you know what it's like to watch your brother receive everything you've ever wanted? The throne, the respect, the power, and then you. Especially you. He laughed, but the sound was broken. So I took you from him, used my shadow magic to create a corpse, hired mercenaries to stage your death, brought you here where no one would ever find you. You're insane, Selene breathed. Perhaps. But I'd rather be insane with you here than sane without you. He moved toward the chamber entrance. I need to check something. Don't try anything foolish. Even if you escape this room, you'd never survive what waits outside. The moment he left, Selene focused everything on the silver chains. Her healing powers, though suppressed, had been slowly gathering strength. She directed that energy toward the metal binding her, not trying to heal it, but rather corroding it, weakening the molecular structure the way infection weakens tissue. The silver began to fracture, hairline cracks spreading through the links. Outside, Ronan gave the signal. His wolf surged forward, and he allowed the transformation to take him. Bones cracked and reformed, muscle and sinew reshaping into something far more lethal than his human form. His massive black wolf stood where the man had been, golden eyes burning with predatory focus. The attack was swift and brutal. Ronan hit the first mercenary before the man could raise his silver blade, jaws closing around his throat with crushing force. Bryn and the warriors engaged the others, steel meeting steel in the rain-soaked darkness. Inside the tower, Valdris heard the commotion, and knew. His brother had found him. Found them. Everything he'd built, every careful plan, was collapsing. He ran back to Selene's chamber, already calling his shadow magic to him. Darkness gathered around his hands, writhing and alive. When he burst through the door, he found her standing, the silver chains broken at her feet, golden light emanating from her hands. No, Valdris breathed. Selene's wolf exploded to the surface after 3 months of suppression. The transformation was agony and ecstasy combined, her body reshaping into the white wolf with silver markings that was her true form. She was smaller than male wolves, but faster, and 3 months of captivity had not dulled her instincts. She leaped at Valdris, claws extended, teeth bared. He threw up a wall of shadow magic that sent her tumbling backward, but she rolled and came up snarling. You can't win, Selene. Even with your wolf freed, you're weak from captivity. I'm a prince of the royal bloodline, trained in combat since childhood, but Selene wasn't trying to win. She was buying time, keeping Valdris focused on her, rather than the battle sounds growing closer outside. Ronan tore through the tower entrance, his massive wolf form devastating anything in his path. The remaining mercenaries tried to form a defense, but they were facing an Alpha King pushed past all reason by months of grief and rage. Bryn and the warriors followed in his wake, finishing what he began. The tower stairs were narrow, forcing Ronan to shift back to human form. He took them 3 at a time, following the mate bond that now sang clearly in his chest. Above, he could hear sounds of struggle, his mate's snarls mixing with another voice. Valdris. When Ronan burst into the chamber, he found Selene in wolf form, circling his brother, both of them bloodied. Valdris held shadow magic in both hands, darkness coiling like serpents ready to strike. Brother, Valdris said, his voice eerily calm despite the chaos. I wondered when you'd arrive. Ronan shifted partially, maintaining his wolf strength while regaining human speech. Release her. Now. Release her? Valdris laughed. She's the only thing I've ever taken from you, Ronan. Do you know how that feels? To finally possess something you wanted? I won't give her up. I can't. You have 3 seconds to surrender before I kill you. You won't kill me. You've never been able to do what's necessary when family is involved. It's your greatest weakness. Valdris's shadow magic surged, creating a barrier between them. She was mine before she was yours. I loved her first, wanted her first, and you took her like you've taken everything else in my life. Ronan's wolf took complete control. He slammed into the shadow barrier with the full force of his alpha power. The magical wall shuddered, cracks appearing in the darkness. Celine, seeing her opening, poured golden healing energy into Ronan through the mate bond. The connection that had been silent for 3 months now blazed to life, and she felt his strength, his rage, his desperate love for her flowing back to her. The shadow barrier shattered. What followed was not a battle between brothers, but something far more primal. Ronan's wolf met Valdris's shadow magic with claws and teeth and supernatural dominance that made the tower walls tremble. Valdris fought back with everything he had, darkness wrapping around Ronan's throat, seeking to choke, to kill. Celine shifted back to human form, directing her healing powers with precision. She couldn't fight Valdris directly, but she could sustain Ronan, healing wounds as quickly as shadow magic created them. The fight was devastating. Stone crumbled, ancient timbers groaned. The tower itself seemed to protest the violence within its walls. Valdris's face was a mask of madness and grief, years of resentment pouring out in every strike. But Ronan was the Alpha King for a reason. He was stronger, faster, and most importantly, he was fighting for something beyond himself. When he finally pinned Valdris to the ground, jaws around his brother's throat, the fight was over. "Do it," Valdris gasped, blood streaming from multiple wounds. "Kill me. It's what I deserve." Ronan's wolf wanted to. Every instinct screamed to end the threat, to punish the male who had stolen his mate and caused 3 months of agony. But as he looked into his brother's eyes and saw pain that mirrored his own, he couldn't complete the killing blow. He shifted back to human form, his hand around Valdris's throat instead of jaws. "No. Death is too easy for you, brother. You'll live with what you've done." Bryn and the warriors entered, binding Valdris with the same silver chains that had held Celine. His shadow magic died, suppressed by the metal. Only then did Ronan turn to Celine. She stood trembling against the far wall, naked from her transformation, covered in grime and blood but alive, so beautifully, impossibly alive. "Ronan," she whispered, and the sound of his name from her lips nearly brought him to his knees. He crossed the chamber in 3 strides, gathering her into his arms, pressing his forehead to hers. The mate bond exploded between them. 3 months of silence giving way to overwhelming connection. He could feel everything she'd endured, and she could feel the depths of his grief. "I have you," he murmured against her skin. "I have you, and I'm never letting go." Celine clung to him, shaking with sobs that were equal parts relief and trauma. "I knew you'd come. I knew you wouldn't give up. Never," he swore. "Not in this life or the next." Behind them, Valdris watched with empty eyes as guards dragged him away, his twisted dream of love and revenge crumbling to ash. The storm finally broke outside, rain giving way to dawn light that filtered through the broken windows. Ronan wrapped his cloak around Celine's shoulders and lifted her into his arms, carrying her down the tower stairs toward freedom, toward home, toward healing. The worst was finally over, but the real work of recovery had only just begun. Chapter 6. Healing and Homecoming. The journey back to the castle took 3 days. Ronan refused to let Celine ride separately, keeping her cradled against his chest on his horse, their bodies pressed together as though physical contact could make up for 3 months of forced separation. The mate bond sang between them constantly now, no longer the desperate pulse of captivity, but a steady, overwhelming connection that made every breath feel shared. Celine had insisted on examining his wounds before they departed the tower. Her healing powers, freed from silver suppression, flowed through her fingertips with golden warmth as she touched the claw marks Valdris's shadow magic had left across Ronan's chest and shoulders. "Hold still," she murmured, her hands glowing as she worked. The injuries sealed beneath her touch, tissue knitting together faster than natural healing would allow, but Ronan barely noticed the physical repairs. His attention was fixed on her face, on the reality of her alive and breathing, and here. "I thought you were dead," he said, his voice rough. "For 3 months I believed the mate bond was severed because you were gone. The silver chains suppressed everything," Celine explained, her fingers tracing the now-healed wounds. "I couldn't reach you," couldn't feel you. It was like being buried alive in silence. Ronan pulled her closer, tucking his face against the curve of her neck. The scent of her, wildflowers and moonlight beneath the grime of captivity, made his wolf settle for the first time in months. I visited your tomb every week, left roses, spoke to stone and lies while you suffered alone. You couldn't have known. She pulled back to meet his eyes, her own green gaze fierce despite exhaustion. Valdris planned everything perfectly. The false body, the shadow magic, the timing. Even I didn't understand what was happening at first. I should have questioned it sooner, should have trusted my instincts. His hands clenched. The dreams I had of you calling for help, I dismissed them as grief-born nightmares. Celine's expression softened. You felt me reaching through the bond when I managed to break free briefly. That connection, however weak, was real. Your wolf knew. Even if your mind couldn't accept it. They fell silent, both processing trauma too fresh to fully comprehend. Behind them, Captain Bryn supervised the prisoners. Valdris rode in chains, his shadow magic bound by silver that left angry burns on his wrists. The surviving mercenaries who hadn't died in the battle were similarly restrained, their fate already sealed. On the second day of travel, Selene felt Ronan's wolf stirring restlessly beneath his skin. The beast that had been going feral during her absence was still unsettled, still carrying months of anguish despite her return. Let me help, she said, placing her palms against his chest. You're exhausted. You need to conserve your strength. This is important. She closed her eyes, focusing her healing abilities inward through their bond. She could feel the damage captivity had inflicted on both of them, the wounds that went deeper than flesh. His wolf had been tearing itself apart, trapped between feral rage and alpha duty. The creature needed more than her physical presence to truly heal. Golden light flowed from her hands into him, and Ronan gasped as warmth flooded through his chest. The healing energy sought out the ragged places in his soul where grief had carved deep channels. She couldn't erase the memory of pain, but she could soothe the raw edges, help his wolf understand that the nightmare was over. Selene, he breathed, and she felt his wolf finally, truly settle. The feral edge that had been threatening to consume him dissolved under her touch, replaced by the calm certainty of a mate bond restored. When she opened her eyes, his golden gaze was clear in a way it hadn't been since before her disappearance. How did you do that? Healing isn't just about physical wounds, she said softly. The mate bond carries emotional damage too. I can't fix everything, but I can help ease the worst of it. He pulled her against him, and they stayed that way for a long moment, both drawing strength from the connection that had nearly been destroyed. The castle came into view on the third day, its towers rising against afternoon sky. Word of their approach had traveled faster than their horses, and the courtyard was already filling with people as they rode through the gates. Lord Theron was the first to reach them. The older alpha looked haggard, his face etched with lines of grief that 3 months of mourning had carved deep. When he saw Selene alive in Ronan's arms, his legs nearly gave out. "Father," Selene said, her voice breaking. Ronan dismounted carefully, helping Selene down, and stepped back as father and daughter came together. Lord Theron's embrace was desperate, his large frame shaking with sobs he'd held back for months. "I thought I'd lost you," Theron choked out. "My only child, my daughter. They told me you were dead. I'm here," Selene whispered against his shoulder. "I'm alive. I'm home." The reunion drew tears from many assembled witnesses. Ronan watched with his own eyes burning, guilt twisting in his chest at the memory of Theron's accusations. The older alpha had blamed him for failing to protect Selene, and he'd been right to do so. When Theron finally pulled back, his eyes found Ronan. For a moment, tension stretched between them. Then the Eastern Alpha stepped forward and gripped Ronan's shoulder. "Forgive me," Theron said roughly. "The words I spoke in grief, the blame I placed on you. You found her. You brought her home. You had every right to question me," Ronan replied. "She was taken under my protection. The fault lies with my own blood." They stood together in shared understanding of what had been nearly lost, of betrayal that cut deeper than any physical wound. Around them, the castle buzzed with activity as word spread. The Queen Luna lived, The Alpha King had found her. The impossible had become real. The great hall filled rapidly as nobles and warriors gathered to hear the full account. Ronan stood at the high table with Selene at his side, his hand never leaving hers, while Bryn delivered the official report. Prince Valdris orchestrated Lady Selene's abduction and staged her death using shadow magic and hired mercenaries, Bryn announced, her voice carrying clearly. He held her prisoner in the abandoned northern territories for 3 months. The Alpha King tracked him there and rescued his mate. Valdris is now held in the dungeons awaiting formal judgment. Shocked murmurs rippled through the assembled crowd. Valdris had been trusted as Beta, as the Alpha King's right hand. The betrayal was incomprehensible to many who had served alongside him for years. "What of the mercenaries who participated?" asked Alpha Gareth, the same regional alpha who had questioned Ronan's judgment weeks before. His tone now carried respect rather than challenge. "Those who survived the assault have been executed for treason against the crown," Bryn stated flatly. "The guards who were complicit in the deception, who helped create the false discovery of Lady Selene's body, have been interrogated. 3 were found to have knowingly participated. They were executed. 2 others were found to have been manipulated without understanding the full conspiracy. They've been stripped of rank and banished from royal service." "And the Beta position?" another alpha asked. "With Prince Valdris imprisoned, will remain vacant until proper judgment is rendered," Ronan interrupted, his alpha command making the words final. "Captain Bryn Ironhide will assume temporary command of royal affairs until formal succession is determined." All eyes turned to Bryn, who bowed deeply. "I am honored by your trust, my king." That evening, once the formalities concluded, Ronan finally allowed himself to truly look at Selene in the privacy of their chambers. The rooms they had shared before her abduction, preserved exactly as she'd left them, waiting for a return everyone else had believed impossible. She stood by the window in fresh clothing, her red hair clean and braided, but he could see the way her hands trembled slightly, the shadows beneath her eyes that spoke of trauma not easily overcome. "The bed is too soft," she admitted quietly. "I know that sounds foolish, but after stone floors, my body expects cold and weight." Her fingers flexed unconsciously, as if testing for chains. "It will take time. For both of us. I keep expecting to wake up and find this is a dream." She whispered against his chest, "That I'm still in that tower, and you're still visiting an empty tomb. You're here. You're real." He tightened his embrace. "And I swear to you, Selene, I will never let anyone take you from me again." The mate bond pulsed between them. No longer the frantic desperation of earlier days, but something deeper, tempered by shared suffering. They had been broken and were still healing, but they were together. That had to be enough for now. "The regional alphas are watching," Selene said after a long silence. "I heard whispers in the hall. They're measuring whether you're still strong enough to lead after everything. Let them watch." Ronan's voice carried grim determination. "They'll see their Alpha King more ruthless than before. Anyone who threatens my mate or my kingdom will learn exactly how far I'm willing to go to protect what's mine." Selene pulled back to study his face, seeing the truth of his words in those golden eyes. The wolf who had been going feral with grief had been tempered into something harder, more dangerous. He had always been a fair ruler, but now there was steel beneath that fairness that hadn't existed before. "What will happen to Valdris?" she asked, though part of her dreaded the answer. "A formal trial before the Council of Regional Alphas, public testimony of his crimes, then judgment." Ronan's jaw clenched. "He wanted you enough to destroy everything. He'll face consequences proportional to his betrayal. He's your brother. He stopped being my brother the moment he put chains on you." The words were final, absolute. Whatever bond of blood had existed between the Stormclaw princes, Valdris's actions had severed it completely. They stood together as night fell over the castle, 2 souls learning to be whole again after months of living as broken pieces. Some nights she woke choking on air that wasn't a cell's, palms pressed to her throat as if silver still burned there. On those nights he simply held her and counted heartbeats with her until dawn. Outside their window, the kingdom settled into cautious relief. The Queen Luna had returned. The Alpha King's strength had been proven, but everyone knew the hardest test was still to come. Justice demanded blood, and Valdris would pay for his crimes before the realm. Chapter 7. Justice and Renewal. The Great Hall had been transformed for judgment. Every regional alpha within 3 days' ride had answered the summons, their presence filling the vast chamber with supernatural power that made the air itself feel heavy. Lord Theron stood among them, his expression carved from stone. Captain Bryn commanded the guard contingent, her warriors positioned strategically throughout the space. At the center of it all, bound in silver chains that left angry burns across his wrists and ankles, stood Valdris Stormclaw. Ronan sat on the throne he'd inherited from his father, Selene at his right hand. The mate bond between them pulsed steady and strong, a constant reminder of what had nearly been destroyed. His wolf, finally settled after months of feral rage, watched through his golden eyes with predatory focus. "Bring forth the evidence," Ronan commanded, his voice carrying the weight of alpha authority that made even the other regional leaders straighten in their seats. Bryn stepped forward, her presentation methodical and damning. Written testimony from the mercenaries executed for their participation, given under alpha command and verified by 3 witnesses. They confirm being hired by a hooded figure bearing the royal seal to stage Lady Selene's death. She laid parchment after parchment on the evidence table. The silver chains used to bind Lady Selene and suppress her abilities in mate bond. Examination by our eldest healer confirms they were crafted specifically for that purpose, commissioned 3 months before the abduction. More documents followed. The exhumed body, confirmed by multiple healers to be a construct created by shadow magic rather than natural birth. Only 3 individuals in the kingdom possess this rare ability. 2 are elderly hermits with alibis. The 3rd is the accused. Finally, Bryn produced a small velvet pouch. The royal seal found in Prince Valdris's private chambers, bearing traces of wax used on documents given to the mercenaries. The evidence was overwhelming, irrefutable. Around the hall, the assembled alphas exchanged grim looks. This was no mere crime. This was betrayal at the highest level, an attack on the sacred mate bond itself. "Prince Valdris Stormclaw," Ronan said, his voice echoing through the silent hall. "You stand accused of abduction, conspiracy, treason against the crown, and desecration of the mate bond. The evidence speaks clearly. What say you to these charges?" Valdris lifted his head, and something in his eyes made Selene's breath catch. There was no remorse there, no shame, only a terrible, broken certainty. "I don't deny them," he said, his voice carrying clearly despite the silver's weakening effect. "Every word is truth. I orchestrated everything. The mercenaries, the false body, the shadow magic construct. I took Selene from him because he's taken everything from me my entire life." A collective intake of breath rippled through the hall. An admission of guilt so complete left no room for political maneuvering or clemency. "You are my brother," Ronan said, and for the first time, his voice carried pain rather than command. "I trusted you as Beta, as blood, as the one person who should have stood beside me against all threats." "Why?" "Because you don't understand what it's like." Valdris's composure finally cracked, years of resentment pouring out. "To always be second, to watch you receive the throne, the respect, the power. To see Selene look at you with love I would have killed for. Do you know I met her first? 2 years before your cursed feast. I saw her at her father's court, and I knew she was meant to be mine. But the moon goddess gave her to you instead, just like she's given you everything else." His voice rose, desperate and bitter. "So, I took her. I made you feel what I've felt my entire life. Loss, grief, the knowledge that what you want most in this world belongs to someone else." The hall remained silent as Valdris's confession echoed off stone walls. When he finished, he slumped in his chains, suddenly looking smaller, broken. Alpha Gareth stood from his seat. "The crimes are confessed. The evidence is absolute. I call for judgment." One by one, the regional alphas rose, their voices joining in agreement. Ronan looked at each of them, then at Selene, whose hand he held tightly. Through their bond, he felt her pain, her understanding that what came next was necessary, but would carry its own weight. "The council will deliberate," Ronan announced. "Guards, remove the prisoner." The deliberation lasted 2 hours. When the alphas reassembled, Their verdict was unanimous. Valdris Stormclaw, formerly Beta of the Realm and Prince of the Royal Bloodline, Ronan pronounced, standing so all could witness. You are hereby stripped of your title and position. You are sentenced to permanent exile beyond the northern borders of the kingdom. Your shadow magic, the power you use to perpetrate your crimes, will be bound through ritual seal. You will live as rogue, without pack, without protection, for the remainder of your natural life. This sentence begins immediately. As the guards moved to take him, Celine felt no triumph and no pity, only the clean ache of a wound finally cauterized. Justice did not return stolen time, but it stopped the bleeding. Valdris's face went pale. For a wolf of noble birth, being forced into rogue existence was a fate many considered worse than death. No pack meant no protection, no status, no identity beyond basic survival. Brother, he whispered, but Ronan's expression remained implacable. You ceased being my brother when you put chains on my mate. Be grateful I'm allowing you to live at all. The ritual to seal Valdris's shadow magic was ancient, requiring 3 experienced practitioners working in concert. They gathered in the castle's courtyard under moonlight, the silver-bound prisoner kneeling at the center of a chalk-drawn circle covered in runes. Celine stood beside Ronan, her hand in his. As the ritual began, the practitioners chanted in the old tongue, their combined power weaving invisible bonds around Valdris's core, where his shadow magic resided. His screams echoed through the courtyard as the sealing took hold. The magic that had been part of him since birth was being locked away, rendered inaccessible. It wasn't removal, which would kill him, but imprisonment that would leave him essentially powerless. When it finished, Valdris collapsed forward, gasping. The practitioners confirmed the seal was complete and permanent. At dawn, Valdris was escorted to the northern border by a contingent of warriors. Ronan and Celine watched from the castle walls as the party departed, taking with them the last remnant of betrayal. Do you regret it? Celine asked quietly. Not executing him? No. Death would have been mercy he didn't deserve. Now he'll spend every day remembering what his obsession cost him. Ronan pulled her closer. Besides, we have more important matters to address. That night, under the full moon, they prepared for the renewed claiming ritual. This ceremony would be different from their original bonding 6 months ago. Where that had been joyous union, this was healing and restoration. The ritual clearing deep in the castle's forest held memories of their first claiming. But tonight, gathered witnesses included only those closest to them. Lord Theron, Captain Bryn, and a handful of trusted pack members formed a protective circle. The ritual master, an ancient wolf who had overseen bondings for 6 decades, began the ceremony. Mate bonds are sacred, given by the moon goddess herself. When such a bond is damaged by trauma, by separation, by suppression, it requires healing rather than simple maintenance. Ronan and Celine faced each other, hands clasped. The mate bond between them pulsed strong, but they could both feel the ragged edges where 3 months of forced silence had left scars. Ronan Stormclaw, Alpha King, do you accept this mate bond fully? Do you choose to heal what has been broken, to strengthen what has been damaged? I do, Ronan said, his golden eyes never leaving Celine's face. With everything I am. Celine Nightbloom, Queen Luna, do you accept this mate bond fully? Do you choose to heal what has been broken, to strengthen what has been damaged? I do, Celine whispered. With everything I am. The ritual master nodded, then let the healing begin. Celine felt her healing powers surge as the ritual activated them. Golden light flowed from her hands where they touched Ronan's. But this time it wasn't just physical healing. The energy poured through the mate bond itself, seeking out every place where their separation had left damage. She could feel Ronan's wolf, finally stable, but still carrying memory of feral rage. She could sense the grief that had nearly destroyed him, the guilt he carried for not protecting her. Her power washed over those wounds, not erasing them but transforming them from open injuries into honored scars. Through their connection, Ronan felt everything she'd endured. The fear of captivity, the confusion of silver suppression, the determination that had kept her fighting. He sent his own strength through the bond, his absolute certainty that she was safe now, protected, loved beyond measure. The healing energy intensified, and Selene gasped as she felt something unlock inside her. The healing powers she'd been developing were suddenly completely accessible in ways they'd never been before. She could see the structure of the mate bond itself, could understand how to repair damages that would have been permanent for any other healer. Extraordinary, the ritual master breathed, sensing the shift. She can heal mate bonds themselves. I've never witnessed such ability. When the ritual completed, both Ronan and Selene were glowing with residual energy. The bond between them was no longer just strong. It was perfectly restored. Every damaged thread rewoven into something even stronger than before. Ronan pulled her into his arms, and she could feel his wolf finally, completely at peace. The beast that had been slowly going feral during her absence was now settled, secure in the knowledge that his mate was safe, and the bond unbreakable. I love you, Ronan whispered against her hair. Through every trial, every nightmare, every moment of grief, I have loved you. I love you, Selene replied, her arms tight around him. And now, nothing will ever separate us again. The witnesses cheered as the newly healed mate bond blazed between the Alpha King and his Queen Luna. They had survived betrayal, separation, and trauma. They had emerged stronger, their love tempered by suffering into something that would sustain them through whatever challenges lay ahead. Justice had been served. Healing had begun. And the kingdom, watching their rulers stand united under moonlight, finally understood that the strength of the crown lay not in power alone, but in the unbreakable bond between two souls who had fought through darkness to find each other again. Chapter 8. Roses and Rebirth. 6 months had passed since the trial, and the castle felt transformed in ways that went beyond physical changes. Spring had given way to summer, then autumn, and now early winter painted the kingdom in frost and promise. The corridors that had once echoed with Ronan's grief-stricken footsteps now carried the sounds of purposeful activity, of a realm healing alongside its rulers. Ronan stood at the window of his study, watching Selene in the courtyard below. She moved among a group of wolves who had gathered at her newly established sanctuary, her hands glowing with golden light as she worked her healing abilities. The sanctuary had become her passion, a place where wolves who had suffered trauma, wolves who had been exiled unjustly or damaged by violence, could find restoration. She's remarkable, Captain Bryn said from the doorway. The newly appointed High Commander of the Royal Forces wore her rank with the same efficiency she'd brought to every task. Her promotion had been unanimous among the regional alphas, recognizing both her loyalty and her crucial role in uncovering Valdris's conspiracy. She is, Ronan agreed, his voice carrying pride that had nothing to do with politics. Through the mate bond, he could feel Selene's satisfaction as she helped a young wolf whose pack had been destroyed by rogues. The healing she offered went beyond physical wounds, touching the damaged places in hearts and souls that might never have recovered otherwise. The Eastern Territories report complete stability, Bryn continued, updating him on the morning's correspondence. Lord Theron sent word that trade agreements are proceeding ahead of schedule. He'll be visiting next month for the winter festival. The relationship between Ronan and his mate's father had been completely restored. Theron made regular visits to the castle, his earlier accusations forgotten in the wake of understanding what had truly happened. The older Alpha's pride in his daughter was evident every time he watched her work, seeing the powerful healer and leader she'd become. And the Alphas who questioned my authority during the crisis? Ronan asked, though he already knew the answer. Gareth and Edmund both sent formal pledges of renewed loyalty. They've seen how you handled the conspiracy, brother against brother, with justice rather than vengeance. Your reputation has never been stronger. It was true. The regional alphas who had begun forming factions during his grief-driven instability now stood firmly behind his rule. They'd witnessed him face the worst betrayal imaginable and emerge not weakened, but tempered into something more formidable. An alpha king who would show mercy when deserved, but whose ruthlessness in protecting his mate and kingdom was now legendary. The new laws Ronan had implemented were already changing pack culture throughout the realm. Mate bond protection had been elevated to the highest crime. Anyone attempting to separate bonded pairs through force coercion, or magic, faced immediate execution. Silver chains could no longer be possessed by anyone outside authorized healers, their use strictly regulated. Reports of abductions or forced matings were to be investigated by royal authority, not just local pack justice. "The kingdom is stronger than it's been in generations," Bryn observed. "You and Lady Selene have given them something to believe in again." Ronan smiled slightly. "She's the one they believe in. I'm simply the wolf fortunate enough to stand beside her." That evening, Ronan found Selene in their chambers, staring out the window toward the forest, where their renewed claiming ritual had taken place 6 months ago. Something in her posture made his wolf stir with concern. "What troubles you?" he asked, moving to stand behind her, arms encircling her waist. "Nothing troubles me," Selene said, but her voice carried a strange quality. She turned in his embrace, her green eyes bright with emotion he couldn't quite identify. "I need to tell you something." Fear flickered through him. "Are you unwell? Is something wrong with your healing abilities?" "No, nothing like that." She took his hand and placed it against her abdomen. "Ronan, I'm pregnant." The world stopped. For a heartbeat, he couldn't breathe, couldn't think, couldn't do anything but stare at her face as the words registered. Then joy, pure and overwhelming, flooded through him so intensely that their mate bond blazed between them. "Pregnant," he repeated, his voice barely a whisper. "You're certain?" The healer confirmed it this morning, 3 months along, which means it happened after the renewed claiming ritual. Her smile was radiant. "We're going to have a child, Ronan. An heir for the kingdom." He pulled her against him, one hand cradling the back of her head, while the other rested protectively over where their child grew. The heir the kingdom needed, the continuation of their bloodline, the living proof that love could survive even the darkest betrayal. "I love you," he said against her hair. "Moon above, Selene. I love you more than I have words for." "I love you too," she whispered back. "And I'm not afraid anymore. Not of the future. Not of what comes next. We've survived the worst. Everything else we'll face together." That night, they made the journey to the memorial that had once been an empty tomb. The marble structure still stood in the castle cemetery, but its purpose had been transformed. Where before it had held lies and false grief, now it served as a monument to all those lost to betrayal and conspiracy. Names had been carved into the stone, wolves who had died in the rogue attacks that Valdris had orchestrated, mercenaries who had been executed for their crimes, even the guards who had been complicit. It was a place of memory and warning, a reminder that justice must always triumph over personal ambition. Ronan carried a single red rose, the same type he'd left every week during those months of false mourning. But tonight's offering was different. This wasn't grief. This was celebration, gratitude, recognition of how far they'd traveled from that dark place. "I used to come here every week," Ronan said quietly, standing before the memorial with Selene at his side. "I would leave roses and speak to silence, believing you were gone forever." "And now?" Selene asked, her hand finding his. "Now, I understand that some bonds are stronger than death, stronger than distance, stronger than any magic or manipulation that tries to break them." He placed the rose at the base of the monument, not in sorrow, but in acknowledgement. The mate bond found a way to survive even when everything tried to destroy it. Selene rested her head against his shoulder, one hand unconsciously moving to her abdomen where their child grew. "Do you think Valdris knows? Out there beyond the borders, stripped of his power and his position? Do you think he understands what he lost?" "I don't know," Ronan admitted, "and I find I no longer care. He made his choices. We made ours. His story ended with exile. Ours continues with hope." They stood together in comfortable silence, watching moonlight paint the memorial in silver and shadow. Around them, the castle grounds were peaceful, the kingdom settled into security it hadn't known in months. Inside those walls, wolves slept safely, protected by an alpha king whose strength had been tested and proven, guided by a Queen Luna whose healing powers extended far beyond simple medicine. The mate bond between them pulsed strong and steady, no longer a desperate connection maintained against impossible odds, but something tempered by suffering into absolute certainty. They had been broken and had healed stronger. They had been separated, and had found each other again. They had faced betrayal from the person who should have been most loyal and had emerged with their love intact. "We should go," Celine said finally. "It's cold. And the baby, our baby," Ronan corrected, the words still feeling miraculous on his tongue. "Our heir. Our future." As they walked back toward the castle, hands intertwined, neither looked back at the memorial. That chapter of their lives had closed. Ahead lay challenges they couldn't yet imagine, joys they were just beginning to discover, and a child who would be born into a kingdom made stronger by the trials their parents had endured. The roses Ronan had left in grief were gone now, replaced by this single bloom offered in gratitude. He would not return to this place weekly anymore. There was no need. The past had been honored, the lost had been remembered, and the future awaited with open arms. Inside the castle, preparations were already beginning for the announcement of Celine's pregnancy. The kingdom would celebrate with festivals and feasts. The regional alphas would send gifts and pledges, and the line of succession would be secured. But for now, in these quiet moments before dawn, it was enough to simply walk together through frost-touched gardens, feeling the mate bond pulse between them like a second heartbeat. They had survived the worst that betrayal could inflict. They had healed wounds that should have been fatal. They had proven that love, when tested by fire, emerged not as ash, but as steel. And now, with a child growing beneath Selina's heart and a kingdom flourishing under their joined rule, they stood ready to face whatever the future might bring. Together, as they were always meant to be. Eternal, unbreakable, whole. The nightmare was over. The dream was just beginning.